So, welcome everyone and all those who have joined us from various parts of the globe and from different time zones as we get together to discuss a subject which is just not the flavor of the season, but it's going to be relevant for times to come. It's a concept which is the most noble of the tools of ADR, the non-adversarial and the logical first port of call in a case of a dispute. And yes, that, my friends, is mediation. So very good afternoon and a good evening, depending on which part of the world you are in now, as we have a mediator representing almost all zones. I am Sanjeev Ahuja and represent Missing Bridge, which is a Center for Conflict Management, where we believe that a dialogue should be the first mode to solve, resolve, and dissolve a particular dispute or a conflict. We also believe that it's not only important to be doing the right thing, but doing it the right way. Hence, an answer to those who are still in a dilemma when they have to choose the appropriate forum to resolve their disputes. So, friends, coming straight away to the topic of the day, future of mediation, a global perspective. Mediation is a need of the hour. Wherever we are in the world, whatever type of dispute we are grappling with, there has to be a way to resolve the issue and the dispute without resorting to litigation or any other adversarial means. We strongly believe that every dispute has to have a human being behind it, and it's important to understand that person and the origins of that dispute. Not knowing the background or its genesis, and merely on the basis of the perception, if we try and provide myopic suggestions disguised as solutions, it can surely play havoc and backfire big time. A solution is a solution from the perspective of the disputant and not necessarily through the eyes of the solution provider. And most of the parties in dispute seek a solution to their problems, and only if the so-called justice can be the solution sought. Else, we have the issue continue. Justice in any case just need not only be delivered, but also seem to be delivered. To make it interesting, we have seen many non-legal issues being dealt by courts, which then by default takes forever and are often sent to court and mediation centers because the solution of many of those only lies with the parties and possibly nowhere else. Hence, let us spare our courts for all the tussles we have and only seek the support for the adjudication, application of law, and dealing with legal issues. For everything else, we have mediation, which is nothing more than an assisted negotiation. This surely is a way to reduce the burden, which is an ongoing problem for the courts worldwide. The concept of mediation is already well developed in many jurisdictions, and many more are embracing this concept by the day. The Singapore Convention in 2019 and the numerous actions by various bodies across are helping this noble message spread around, sensitizing stakeholders about mediation. But is it enough? Where are we with regards to mediation in various jurisdictions? How is it evolving and what are the broader challenges it is facing? Is it just a lip service at places, or there is a fundamental shift in our mindset which has already started? What else can be done to make it mainstream? What kind of disputes we should be subjecting to mediation? And what else needs to be done both at the policy level and of course at the ground level to achieve what we need to as we move ahead promoting and pushing mediation? Answers to this and many more questions would be given and debated by our special guests along with all invited mediators, each one of them renowned and prominent, having kindly agreed to be here with us today, taking out the precious time on a weekend and sharing with us their thoughts. I'll keep the introductions very brief. On a click of a button nowadays, you can get to know everything about them as they're all well known in this space. And our main objective is to hear more from them and less from me. So here are the ground rules quickly for the attendees. You could share your queries and comments in the chat box. Time permitting, which will try and address as many questions as possible. So friends, let me introduce our special guest for the session, followed by a brief quick introduction of the panelists. Please join me in welcoming Mr. P.K. Malhotra, who's former Secretary Law, Government of India. He continues to lead and assist in the government's initiative of rolling out the recently notified Mediation Act 2023 by contributing in the rules and regulations and the format as is required to ensure an effective and efficient act on the ground, which surely can help the country in the space of dispute resolution the non-adversarial way. Incidentally, he is also on the board of advisors at Missing Bridge and keeps guiding us on our way forward. Welcome, sir. Let us now have a quick peep into mediator's profile, after which, I'll invite Mr. Malhotra to share his views. We start with Mr. Ro Thun Vegard from Norway. He's a facilitator, advisor, and a trainer in negotiation, mediation, and conflict resolution. He is the visionary behind Vegard Negotiation Institute. We have already been joined by Ms. Foret Asnin. She's from Israel. She has been an independent full-time mediator since 1999 and has handled more than 5,500 local and international mediations, including some very sensitive situations. Mr. Fola Rad from Nigeria. He's a distinguished commercial lawyer, notary public, and mediator based out of Lagos, and a principal partner of Fortifa Partners, having profound understanding of the neuro-linguistic programming. Ms. Virash Srikishan from South Africa. She's a civil and commercial mediator operating under the brand Fair Practice and bringing together professionals who are aligned to the cause of ADR, A here standing for appropriate. Mr. AJ Jawad from India, one of the most active faces in the space of mediation training in India, and is also a global faculty. He's a senior mediator trainer for the Mediation and Conciliation Project Committee of Supreme Court and one in Tamil Nadu High Court. Ms. Pushp Gupta from India, she is a mediator at Supreme Court as well as High Court and District Courts of Delhi, having handled more than 600 cases, a career spanning over 25 years, and leading from the front through our e-mediation writing venture. She is also active in the training space. And finally, Mr. Tatling from Singapore. He's an advocate and solicitor, Supreme Court of Singapore and solicitor, Supreme Court of England and Wales. He represents Maxwell Mediators of Singapore, a certified mediation advocate and a mediator, being on various international panels, including being a principal trainer at Singapore Mediation Center. Let me invite Mr. Malhotra for his insights and his address on the topic of today, future of mediation and a global perspective. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjeev, first of all, for making me part of this important deliberation where people from panelists from various jurisdictions are participating. And on a very important topic, which I think, so far as litigation is concerned, all of us are concerned that decision should be expeditious and acceptable to both the parties in a win-win situation. And what better method can be than the ADR? And in ADR also, what better method can be there than the mediation? And so far as the Indian scenario is concerned, all of us know that we have large number of cases of pending in our courts. As on today, the estimated number of cases which are pending in the Indian courts is about 5.5 crore, which is too large a number. And going by the judge population ratio, I know one of the judge has observed that if the litigation is to be fought in the court as per the system which is prevalent today, and even if new cases are filed, it will take almost 100 years to dispose of the present pendency. So what is the alternative? The alternative is the alternate dispute resolution. And in alternate dispute resolution, it's not a new concept so far as India is concerned. India has always believed in ADR as a better mechanism for resolving disputes, and mediation has been intrinsic to traditional form of dispute resolution in India. It's very much part of the Indian history and culture. And if I'm talking about the religious scripture of India, those who know about Ramayana and Mahabharata, you will find examples of mediation in those scriptures also. When Lord Krishna went to Dhritarashtra on behalf of the Pandavas, asking for 5 villages so that the war between Kaurava and Pandavas can be avoided. And it is only when the Kauravas refused to give on 5 villages to the Pandavas, the war took place between Kaurava and Pandavas, and the destruction is well known. Of course, it was a case of failed mediation, but the example why I give it here is because mediation has been prevalent in our country right from the ancient days. And the same was carried on if we are talking about the today's scenario to reduce the pendency. In India, we created a scenario way back in 1999 when we amending our code of civil procedure mandated all courts. Just a minute, there is some message on my screen. Oh, okay. We mandated all courts through a legislation passed by the parliament that before a court starts adjudicating a dispute, it should ask the parties to explore whether it is possible to settle this dispute through the mechanism of alternate dispute resolution, that is the arbitration, conciliation, mediation, Lok Adalat, which is peculiar to India, which is created under the Legal Services Authorities Act, where in the Lok Adalat, again, it is a form of mediation where the disputes are settled. So I think we started way back in 1999, and thereafter, we started giving it legal recognition under various legislation in sector-wise. But I think that sector-wise litigation, dispute resolution through mediation was not keeping the pace with the time, and the pendency in the court kept on increasing. Some of the examples where we have done it is the Commercial Courts Act of 2015, where we thought probably commercial disputes can be settled through it. And we were learning from the other jurisdictions where the mediation is already in progress. I was looking at the views which have been given by TAT in one of the articles, and one of the representative from Nigeria also was speaking about it. And the kind of difficulties which we are facing in implementation of the mediation are the same as are available in other jurisdictions. And therefore, I must compliment Mr. Sanjeev Ahuja for organizing this program through this Missing Bridge platform, where we can understand from each other's jurisdiction as to where the problems are and what are the solutions available. Again, coming back to the Indian scenario, let me say that we have created a very good legislative framework. But what happened, we were earlier creating it only in a sector-specific legislation. Take, for example, we created it for micro, small, and medium enterprises because the disputes there are very small. Legal issues are not much. Therefore, the mediators can probably not necessarily from the field of law, but they are trained mediators who can solve this kind of issue. We came out with, in the Commercial Code Act of 2015 also, we came out with similar kind of dispute resolution mechanism through statutory backing. In the Companies Act also, we made similar kind of provision. And I also mentioned about the Consumer Protection Act, where the small disputes are there, dispute between the person who has bought services or goods and he is not getting his disputes resolved. If he goes to the court of law, the kind of pendency which we are having, probably it will take ages. But if he goes, it's resolve it through mediation, probably it becomes much easier. The only problem was all those areas which were not statutorily covered, probably implementing the settlement arrived at mediation was becoming a difficulty. Therefore, we have been thinking of bringing a standalone legislation for settlement of dispute through mediation, and the Parliament of India passed an Act of 2023. We have a time constraint. I'll not go into the details of it because we would like to listen from the views of the panelists as to how best we can achieve the result with the kind of legislative framework which we in India has created. But as I said, the problems are common among all the countries. And we all believe that so far as the mediation is concerned, we must ensure, even if it is governed by legislation, that there is a party autonomy, there is inclusion of the government, because government is one of the biggest litigant in almost all jurisdictions, only because of the number of decisions which are taken by the government, and the reduced timeline which are there in the mediation, and a win-win situation for both the parties in the mediation, because it gets a befitting burial after both the parties sign the agreement. And we also wanted to make of the technology for settlement of these disputes, and therefore we have incorporated provision for online mediation. More importantly, it was a necessity that so far as the mediators are concerned, we should have a pool of trained mediator. In the absence of trained mediators available in our country or in other jurisdiction, probably people who are working as a counsel in the court or working as an arbitrator also act a mediator. I don't say that they can't act as a mediator. They can definitely act as a mediator if they have that kind of training and that kind of mindset. But what happens, the kind of experience which they gain in the court or as an arbitrator or as an arbitration counsel, probably that gets imbibed into the mediation process also, which sometimes create a problem for early resolution of disputes in the mediation. So what I'm pleading through this platform is, if we can learn from other jurisdiction also, then probably we can have a separate pool of trained mediators, because once the disputes get settled through mediators, it gets a final barrier. More importantly, I think that there should be a separate independent autonomous body which will lay down the norms under which these mediator or the institution which are working for mediation, they function. And for that purpose, in the Indian Act of 2023, we have created a Mediation Council of India. Of course, there are certain reservations being expressed with regard to its constitution, that there is a intervention by the court. But let me assure you, when this legislation was passed, government ensured it once that the mediation council is constituted by the government. Thereafter, there is no interference from the government side, and the Mediation Council of India derives its authority from the law passed by the parliament, and it is free to make rules and regulation as to how the mediation process will be implemented in the country. And we have, while making this law, drawn inspiration from the Singapore Convention on Mediation, to which India is also a signatory. It was signed by India in 2019. But yes, certain apprehensions are being expressed that we have not fully implemented it because we have not yet ratified it. But let me assure you, so far as the Indian litigation is concerned, like in other jurisdictions, we are also looking for as to how this convention work on ground. And so far as the international mediation agreements or settlements are concerned, how they are seen on the ground, so that they unnecessarily doesn't put a burden in a matter where probably the settlement is arrived at on not the laid down principle, but on a principle which are not recognized by law. So I think in due course, we will be in a position to implement the mediation, the Singapore Convention in its full spirit. But by and large, all principles of the Singapore Convention, by and large, have been looked into and taken note of while passing this particular legislation. Now, I have talked about the independent mediation bar, I think, which is very, very, very important from our point of view, because it will definitely see that the legal status of the mediation settlement agreements is implemented in our country. And this is not only for commercial disputes. We have large number of disputes pertaining to municipal law violation, Motor Vehicle Act, under the Motor Vehicle Act, under the Consumer Protection Act. I think these are all areas where probably mediation can be more successful as compared to the other modes of ADR. And as I said earlier, in some of the jurisdictions where I've seen, the problems are common. I will not go into all those, because sitting in India, we would like to understand from the other jurisdiction as to what kind of difficulties they are also facing and what solutions they have found out, so that we can also share our experience. We are a largest democracy of the world, and the kind of legislation we have made, we have drawn inspiration from other jurisdiction also while making these legislations. So maybe with kind of practices which we will be discussing through this platform of missing bridge. And I think this will be a good platform, and whatever conclusions are drawn here on this platform, we will be conveying it to the government, so that mediation, as it is succeeding in other jurisdictions, we are also able to make India mediation as a successful dispute resolution platform. I think with these opening remarks, I would like to hear the views of all the other participants. In fact, Sanjeev ji, I have to leave for another meeting. But to the extent my time permit, I would definitely like to hear the views of all other panelists who have come here with a wide experience from their jurisdiction. And I hope you will excuse my absence if I have to leave in between. Thank you very much.
No, we understand, sir. Thanks a lot. And that was a lot of insight with regards to the government perspective, for sure. The only thing quickly I wanted to say was that, a lot is expected from the policymakers and the government. And this is true, all across. But I'm sure there is a lot which has to be done on the ground itself, right? Whether it's the mindset or how you actually start accepting the disputes as an integral part of our lives, right? So if that's going to be regular, then there has to be an alternative, but to go to the courts all the time. So a macro, as in top down, plus a micro, grounds up, everything has to, I guess, move together. So, but anyway, thanks a lot for that. So, of course, depending on the time permission, like, please be around for as long as is possible. So you can directly, also hear from, all the experts we have today. But thank you anyway. So we'll move ahead. So let me take it straight to the, straight to the Q&A session, where I start with the most basic question. Why mediate? Why mediation? The answers most likely would get a varied flavor depending on the jurisdiction and the approach mediators and the society has towards the disputes. And the concept, of course, bases the culture, the mindset, and the practices. So let us have some divergent views. And maybe it will be a good idea if we can have a reference of a case, right? Whatever comes at the top of the recall. Well, it could be because of some fun element, some real challenge, something very satisfying, something peculiar about a particular case you handled. So whichever way, I mean, if you can give a quick reference, so we can have 3 or 4 panelists, sharing their views. So let's start with Virash, if that's fine. Virash, good to hear you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjeev. And thank you for inviting me. First, let me just say thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel and to hear everyone and engage with everyone today. I am delighted to represent South Africa on this panel, and I hope I give off some information that is helpful for anyone. So my view about mediation in South Africa, much like what I've heard Mr. Malhotra say about India, we also have traditional practice of mediation in South Africa. So we have a blend of the Western style of practice of mediation and the African style of the practice of mediation. And the African style of mediation is often used in our community disputes or within tribal negotiations. And now we've also included the Western style of mediation. And both these styles are recognized within our legal system to address all types of disputes. So the African style of mediation forms part of our customary law, and the Western style of mediation is part of our civil procedure processes. Now, just I know time permitting, so I'm just going to go through just briefly why I think, in my opinion, what mediation is. Firstly, I want to say that mediation is not therapy. People like to think that mediation is therapy, where people go in there and they start talking about their feelings, and it's just a waste of time because there's no agreement. All they're doing is trying to get along. It's not therapy. For me, it's a flexible process in which the mediator facilitates and guides the participants in that mediation through the stages of a negotiation, at the same time taking into account their emotional state and ability to negotiate realistically and reasonably. And that's what sets mediation apart from other dispute resolution processes, because emotions influence our behavior and our mindset. And we know that with litigation, there's very little room or no room to address the emotional state of the disputants. However, what we've seen in mediation, what I've seen in practice, and by being a mediator, not taking into account the emotions that drive that positional behavior of the disputants, there's a lot that is left unsaid about what their particular concerns are in this dispute and in those circumstances that they are faced with. And not taking into account their emotional state, what we're doing is ignoring their capability to negotiate reasonably and realistically. And by leaving their emotions out in a litigation process, this could be open up to litigators manipulating it to push their own agenda or to continue a battle for there to be a winner or loser outcome. Whereas in mediation, the emotional state of the disputants is taken into account to address what is actually holding them back from finding that mutual ground. And the conversational style that the mediator uses in getting to the foundational understanding of how this dispute came about and what it is they want to see, what the outcome they want to see that meets their expectations or unmet expectations and priorities, it opens the door for the disputants, for the participants to realize what were our challenges in actually getting along or continuing our relationship or actually finalizing our relationship in an amicable way. So I find that mediation is more of a person-centric process or an approach to resolving disputes, and it speaks to what makes us human, which is our emotions, our thought processes, and our ability to problem solve. Now, asking for an example very quickly, culturally, status means a lot within our African culture. And one of the mediations that I had to do involved a director who had recently been appointed and her manager who was older than her. And the director felt that because the manager was older than her, her status wasn't being respected. And they were having these clashes of communication. And when they came to mediation, it was actually revealed that the previous director had different forms of communication. And that was that all emails were sent to her assistant and not to the director themselves. So the manager was actually sending out emails to the assistant of the director and not to the director herself. And using mediation, what it did was opened up the conversation that it wasn't about a status or age. It was that there was implementation of a process where emails were sent to the wrong person or a different person. So given the opportunity in mediation to discuss their communication preferences, it then prevented for calls of insubordination and alleviated any misunderstanding and expectations they had of their role in the company. So that's just a brief example of how mediation, in using cultural differences in understanding status, helped me get involved in getting them to communicate and alleviate the high emotions that were in that mediation. So that's my contribution for now. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So you actually told us that it's just not the typical dispute, right? It's also a cultural difference, which is also a situation which can be handled. So there has to be a dialogue, there has to be a conversation to understand what's the root problem. So great, thanks for that. So from South Africa, let's take a dive and go to Singapore. Kat, you would want to take the next, attempt on this. So why mediation? Why mediate? And what's your take on this thing? Maybe with one of the good quick example you can. Give me a second. Are you able to?
Okay, now I can unmute. Thank you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Sanjeev, thanks. Well, do you want me to pick up or just give a view on my perspective?
Your perspective is, you come from Singapore, of course, you've traveled across, you've seen what's happening elsewhere, but it would be nice to have, a particular jurisdiction's view as well, so that attendees get to, really evaluate, what's happening in which part of the world. So, yeah.
Well, I think when one looks at my part of the world, Singapore, among many Asian countries, have in the last maybe 10, 20 years considered mediation to be an extremely viable form of dispute resolution, both within the framework of litigated disputes as well as within the framework of resolving community disputes. I think in Singapore in particular, the government has experimented with many different kinds of methods to resolve disputes, and mediation has become one of the ways in which it's gained lots of traction and usage within the legal community as a very viable way to resolve disputes because of cost and time factors. I think when one considers the question that you posed, Sanjeev, in the earlier discussion, why mediation, right? The answer, I think, will probably vary depending on, of course, where you're from in the world. But even in my part of the world, the question will probably vary depending on which part of the framework you're looking from. I mean, which stakeholders do you represent? For instance, I suppose in my jurisdiction, although we are a very small country and we do not have the caseload in the courts as you would have in India, many years ago, when we were looking at this, perhaps more than 30 years ago, the caseload in Singapore did result in litigated cases taking a long time to reach trial. after mediation came on board, you find that on top of the courts here, which have a very effective framework to resolve disputes through litigation, it does enable the court to reduce its caseload by encouraging disputants to choose mediation to resolve disputes. And the kinds of mediation that you will find in commercial mediation in Singapore, you will often see parties resolving the dispute in a one full day mediation. In fact, the Singapore flavor tends to be for commercial resolution of litigated disputes, a one-day commercial mediation that usually has about 75% resolution rate for the case, which is very high. But consider that this rate, while high, would pale even by comparison to the court annex mediations that we have for the lower courts, the state courts, where the success rate of a case going into a court annex mediation and achieving a full and final settlement rate goes up to between 85 to 92%. So extremely high for litigated disputes in court. Of course, from the government perspective, from a policy perspective, mediation is a great way to enable parties to resolve disputes without the acrimony overflowing into the community. From the disputant's point of view, I mean, Viraj, I totally agree with what she has said. It gives disputants a chance to choose their way of resolving dispute, choose their own solutions. But I would say that the greatest benefit from my experience as a dispute resolution practitioner is that mediation offers disputants an opportunity to consider and assess the way forward and to weigh the scale of whether litigation or arbitration or some other adversarial form of dispute resolution is to be favored versus finding their own solutions. So, in short, a successful mediation to me would be one where disputants are given the right to determine their own outcome, but it would be also a way in which they can enter a process which is fair, which for them would be, at the end of the process, psychologically very satisfactory, and it gives them a chance to resolve that dispute using the experience and the intervention of an experienced neutral. Hand this back to you, Sanjeev. Thank you.
Right. So thank you. You want to quickly refer to any of a case which is something peculiar, which has left a mark on your mind or something, very quickly?
Well, I would say that some of the most intractable cases that I mediate are really not in the commercial space. In the commercial space, you often find that people would have the alternative of going to the court, or they may already be in court or in arbitration. The most intractable cases I'm involved in are often the cases I do for ESG cases, for cases involving government and involving community within, say, a World Bank setting. So in the World Bank cases that I'm involved in, some of these cases would require, they are very involved, they require lots of capacity building, and they often take, well, at least a year for you to grapple with the issues and for you to be effective and to make a difference, to allow people to choose their own outcomes. And I think you have a segment later on where we talk a little bit about investor state, but those disputes I think tends to be multidimensional, very challenging. But when you see people coming into the process and being educated on what the process offers them, I think you will find at the end that our role, our jobs as a neutral in this area becomes extremely satisfying.
True. So there's a lot of scope for creativity and finding out different kind of solutions in community issues or ESG, as you rightly said. But the percentage of hit rate and the success rate, what you refer to, 75%, 80, 85 is something really to be looked forward to in terms of that's a big inspiration, that's a possibility. So I'm sure we need to do a few things right on the ground to try and achieve those levels. So great. So from Singapore, let's go to Israel or to you. The questions remains the same. Why mediate? Why mediation? And an example of something special. Over to you.
Hello, everybody, and Thank you, Sanjeev, for putting this event. It's a very important event, and it's very difficult to speak after Varish and Tat because I agree with everything they said, and it's as if they have said everything that is needed to be said. But I will add a little bit myself. I find that mediation is not only a dispute resolution tool. It's a very good dispute resolution tool, and in most cases, I find it to be the best option for achieving smart solutions. In most disputes, that's right. But apart from being a very good dispute resolution tool, mediation is an excellent business tool. Business problems can be superbly be solved by mediating them or using mediation tools. I have a lot of cases. It's not cases, it's problems between shareholders. Usually it's not even a formal conflict. And the shareholders are using the mediation or the mediator in order to overcome the problems before they become a catastrophe or a case, before they reach court, before officially the lawyers are involved. I can say that usually when they come to mediation, even when they are not represented, I know that the lawyers are in the background assisting the mediation and supporting their clients. So I would say that mediation is also a very important business tool and also a very important tool for handling relationship and cultural challenges, cultural and emotional challenges. Varish has already mentioned that, so I will not elaborate. But we see miracles happening in the mediation room, overcoming emotional barriers, high emotions, and extreme cultural differences. I think that what is unique about mediation is this is the only dispute resolution tool that can address all the layers of the conflict, the one that are officially in the case, in the papers, and all the hidden layers that are the ones that unless you actually address them smartly, you don't manage to fully assist the parties. So mediation, because it's the only dispute resolution tool that can address every layer of the conflict. If you think about it, I see a conflict like a triangle. One angle is the legal angle. The other angle is the economical angle. And the most hidden layer or angle is the cultural and emotional one. If we know to address, to navigate between all three layers, all three angles of the problem, and we smartly and very carefully uncover what needs to be covered, then we can assist the parties to really solve the full scope of the problem. I would add that when I started mediating, I did that after many years of being a commercial litigator. And at one point, I just understood that I'm taking my clients to court to solve non-legal problems by legal measures. And this didn't make sense to me. And that was when I decided to become a mediator. And as the other speakers already say, we see a lot of good results from mediations, and that's why I think people should choose it. But moreover, mediation for me is a social tool, is a game changer for people, for entities, and for societies to change the way they communicate their differences. As was already said, I'm from Israel. And as you probably hear in the news, I'm from a region, a very challenging region right now. A lot of tension, a lot of cultural tension. And I think that mediating every day, even in these challenging days. And I have a lot of mediations between Arabs and Jews. We prove that we can do differently. We can find smart solutions. We can communicate our differences. And this is a very important message to the world or to the society we live in, especially in these challenging times. So that's was
Great.
my contribution for now. Thank you.
Oren. Thank you. So from there, let's move further down. Roar, on to you next. You are able to unmute yourself? Yes, great. Yes, sir. Over to you. You want me to repeat I mean, the question? It was simply put, why mediation, why mediate, and, your views and maybe, quick reference to any case which you have at the top of your recall. Over to you, sir.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Sanjeev, and thank you for the previous contributions. It's easy to say I follow all the others, and I will definitely say I do. Mediation, it's it's the valuable process, and it's the key elements, and the key elements that was just highlighted by Orit now, when it's the ability to natural elements, to incorporate the natural elements of emotions, of relationships, cultural part, the values they have with them into the situation they are now. And of course, the different ways to be able then to communicate this into the conflict resolution process, and not by a representative, but by themselves. That way, the process will be communicated in a more honest way than it's dressed up as the lawyer would like to present the conflict. So this holistic approach ensures that the resolution is comprehensive and addresses all facets of the conflict, and not just the legal, economical, or technical aspects of it. When I looked into this, I thought, okay, what else should I do? Yes, look into what mediation, how it's in Norway. We have also a long tradition for it. We have a tradition, we're coming back to the interstate. We have a lot of different civil law disputes in Norway. We have a lot of Norwegian legislation to facilitate the use of it. We have different mediation institutes that we had for many, many years. What we have seen the latest years, we have an increase and strong increase in judicial mediation. It is a challenge to be a private mediator to try to get the cases, because we have a lot of the mediation institutes, and a lot of the mediation goes directly into the court system. And we have great trainings, both by to mediation private mediators, but also great mediation trainings to the judges. So they are not only very skilled in the legal matters when they come to the court, but they are in the recent years very highly educated in mediation. And I think that is a strong way as a pre-stage for hopefully a development of more private mediators, and I will come back to that to maybe some later questions. But what I wanted to emphasize at the last part of my response to this, when you asked about a case that we have been looking into, and what I was thinking in that case was to see, I was sitting a while ago with a case. So in a way, it didn't go well, and on the other side, it went very well. And what I wanted to emphasize is what is the goal of the mediation process? And many times we think that the goal is to find that solution, but the goal could also be to check, to test the ground is it any future possibilities between this party and the other party? And my case, in this case, related to family members, and it was initiated after an episode of physical violence. And one party contacted me to inquire whether this situation could be mediated. And after consideration of this, having very structured and good pre-mediation meetings with both parties, we set the framework, everything seems very well. We had a mediation process, and the mediation process failed in just a few minutes. And you can think, hey, why do I bring this case up? But the point for me is that one party had so many strong emotions. This was luckily online. So it was, even with these strong emotions, he couldn't hold it to be close to the other party in that process. And for the party that had initiated this mediation process, the outcome was not necessarily to be best friends and find a mutual agreement with this other family member, but it was to see, is it possible for us to be in a relationship in the future? And this process, even it failed in the outcome, it was successful in the matter that we were able to do the process, but without controlling the approach and controlling the emotions with this dominant party. It was no ground to have a future relationship between them. So for me, that was a kind of a reflection, that the takeaway was this experience. What was important to clarify the aim of the mediation early in the process. And it highlighted that the goal of mediation should not always be to find a common acceptable solution. It is crucial to understand what the parties truly want to achieve from the mediation. And although no agreement, the mediation provided valuable clarity and closure for the party seeking it. So that was just a different approach into a case that I found challenging, but very, very rewarding to be working on.
Okay. Thank you, Ro. And what you also, in a way, hinted was that you might come to a mediation for something specific in mind, but what you end up taking, from there can be a different shape, different size. I mean, the progress can be in a different avatar for all you know. But as Jawad normally keeps saying, if you're better off than where you were, then I think mediation is successful, whether it's in parts or as a whole. So great. So let's jump to Push. Push, you will want to address the same question your own way. She comes from India. I'm sure she has another interesting perspective. Give me a second. You'll be able to unmute. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you for organizing this wonderful session where the topic is really lucrative for us, future of mediation and the global perspective. But the question which you have put to me is in past tense now. Why mediation? It should be why not mediation? Why mediation was we've been working for past 15 years in India to make it workable solution. So it's no more why mediation, it's why not mediation. We are at that stage. And I'm really grateful to Mr. P.K. Malhotra, sir, for just bringing out the clarity as to what kind of burden we have in our court system right now with so many cases pending already before the courtrooms, and how mediation is preferred then as litigation. Thank you so much, sir, for that complete overview about the condition of our Indian judicial system, legal system. And thanks to my previous co-panelists also, that how they have brought forward the features of mediation. So I would not be spending time about why mediation, what are the features, because Viraj has clearly said very clearly, it is like if we do not do that, we are ignoring their capability to decide. And how Roar has added to that, yes, with an holistic approach, we can deal with emotional challenges. And Orit, I am going to buy this triangle of yours for my future deliberations and topic, that how you have clearly said that third line is missing from that triangle. We have legal, we have economical considerations, but that emotional challenges and barriers, which is the beauty of this mediation, which keeps it on a different pedestal. Certainly, it will help us. So, Sanjeev, as far as when India is concerned, we all are aware who are from India that India already has a rich Asian ancestry about mediation. It's just that we have not been accepted legally. We don't have a legislation. So to me in India, I've always felt that ADR has gone into different transitions and different full forms. Earlier, it was ADR was Asian Dispute Resolution Mechanism, which was Mahajans and Panchayats. Then came an avenues for dispute resolution, which was through litigation through courtroom systems. Then there were like alternative dispute resolution system, which came in India, though it was sprinkled in different legislation from time to time, Industrial Dispute Act and other. But in India, the term mediation was clearly understood by everyone, more so with the introduction of Section 89 in CPC by an amendment in 1999. There it was then that we could actually craft a difference between conciliation provided under the Arbitration Act and the mediation, finding its separate place in Section 89 of Code of Civil Procedure. So it was then that it came out as an slowly and slowly with the passage of time from alternative dispute resolution mechanism, we are now becoming, and voice to spread that it is the most appropriate dispute resolution mechanism. So from where we were and where we are right now and where we have to travel, we have to make it as the most apt dispute resolution mechanism in times to come, because our present will definitely influence future. So instead of worrying about our future, we have to work for our present so that mediation is well accepted by everyone. We all know the features of mediation, the elements, the principles of mediation, how it empowers party. It's better than conciliation, because in conciliation, the conciliator is given a power to even suggest solutions. But mediation gives complete autonomy to parties to craft their own solution, to sit in mediation. So it is much better than conciliation, also mediation. I would say that we are all just for mediation. Mr. Jawad has already left his practice, active litigation practice, and has devoted himself 24 hours, 365 days to mediation as a profession. So we are in that phase. And as far as the example is concerned, I would rather say that everyone, we all keep on saying that mediation is a platform wherein not just the dispute which is referred on table can be amicably sorted out, but you can just bring in more disputes also as part of your mediation agreement. So it happened with me just few days back. So I was looking for an example which I can share to justify why mediation and why we can, why we should be convincing others for this. It was a matter in India for a check dishonor. So Virash, Orit and Road and Tat, thank you so much for just bringing from Singapore that you people are working so much for the encouragement of the mediation there. So in India, we have the system of check dishonor cases, which is governed by Section 138 of Negotiable Instrument Act, wherein when it gets dishonored, it goes to the court once the party does not pay. So it was an amount of rupees 24 lakhs, which was the check which was dishonored for. So during the mediation settlement, after the process, after deliberation, parties in that agreed for an amount of just rupees 8 lakhs of rupees as full and final settlement of that dishonored amount, which was 24 lakhs. But additionally, since it was builder-buyer contract, actually where they had worked in past and the dispute arose, they agreed in mediation that they will recommence with the building, which they faulted, and they again entered into a builder-buyer contract and agreement that he'll be raising a flat. One flat was in question. So the builder agreed that I'll complete the project in another 6 to 8 months with these much of installments, and I'll give you a possession somewhere in the end of the year. So this was part of the mediation agreement, which was referred, though for a check dishonor case, but parties reunited themselves. Their relationship, contractual relationship was reunited. Otherwise, had it been simple paying goodbye, but they renewed their relationship and they wanted to carry it forward. So that is the beauty of mediation, that you come up with something else and you end up going with a large baggage of relationships also, and always in profit. So there is no loss there. Always in mediation you go, even if when it is unsettled, we all keep saying that even the matters which go unsettled, parties are more focused to know as to where they should be disputing amongst themselves, even in the litigation. So it keeps the door open for positivity and hope. So I think I've answered in my limited time.
You did. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So, for it, your triangle definitely has become popular. So I'm sure it's going to go all across. And one point, since Mr. Malhotra is here, sir, as Tad just shared, the success, the high success rates in Singapore, and that was just not in private mediation, in commercial 75%, in court NXT says 80, 85. Now, what it brings also to the limelight is now in current context, Singapore doesn't have a similar situation of the courts getting burdened by the number of cases, right? Which is a point he made. Where if we see from Indian context and from other places, lot many other places, one of the reason to push mediation is because the courts are under pressure. So we should use mediation. Now, does it come as a filler? The point was it definitely is an enabler to help you reduce the burden. But to me, to be fair to mediation as a concept, I guess, it should be given the due weightage and the push and the acceptance for what it is in terms of the inherent advantages, preserving of relationships, amicable, solutions, creativity. So let that be, clearly accepted and absorbed, so that whenever we are putting up any rules, regulations, or we are having any discussions, the very fact that the first point comes in, courts are under pressure, so we should look at mediation. I think they're somewhere like, they're not doing justice to a great concept otherwise. So irrespective when 10, 20 years or maybe prior, hypothetically, if our courts are also lesser burdened, are we saying that we'll probably let go of mediation as a concept? So that was a point I think you brought up very well. And, for us, we take you as our ears and eyes to the government. So we are saying, let that, sense also prevail somewhere, that let's give it its fair due under the sun, that this is a great concept, irrespective whether the courts are under pressure or not. So you want to have something, to add on? Otherwise, I'll move to the other panelists. Give me a second, sir. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Sanjeev, I think you are making a very valid point. In fact, we have been, as Pushp also pointed out, statutory recognition to mediation India was given when Section 89 of the CPC was amended in 1999. Right. Before that, the word mediation was not used. It was even when we passed the Act of 1996, it was based on model law, ancestral model law, which dealt with arbitration and conciliation. And now with the passing of the new Mediation Act and taking clue from the Singapore Convention that the arbitration and conciliation and mediation are now used interchangeably. Yeah. Therefore, we have deleted the chapter relating to conciliation from the Arbitration Act, and we are more concentrating on the mediation now. Yeah. I would like to draw the attention of the participants, more particularly from the Indian perspective, but my friends from other jurisdictions will also take a clue from this. The Government of India, to promote mediation in comparison to arbitration, has also come out with an independent circular executive order issued by the Ministry of Finance on 3rd June 2024, saying that first mechanism for settlement of commercial disputes with the contractor, so far as the government is concerned, because in India it is said that government is the largest litigant. And since it is the largest litigant, the burden on the courts is more with regard to the litigation in the commercial dispute. There are more disputes in the courts. So if mediation is to be given and all disputes which involve 10 lakh rupees or more should first be resolved through mediation. I think this is a very good step taken by the Government of India to promote mediation even in comparison to arbitration, because our own experience of looking into the arbitration for so many years, right, in spite of the fact that you have the model law incorporated into the Indian context, but still it was not succeeding the way we were looking at it when we adopted it. So I personally feel with the kind of step which we have taken, bringing an umbrella legislation and in the party, maintaining the party autonomy, giving precedence to the settlement arrived at by the party through mediator and giving it a legal backing in case the mediator has accepted that that kind of mediation. I think we are moving in the right direction. The number of cases in the courts will be reduced. Number of cases going to the arbitration will be much less because ultimately arbitration is also going, it is also an adjudicatory process where the arbitrator gives a decision and again it becomes subject to appeal. But in the mediation, at least we have an advantage that there are very, very limited ground where the mediator himself is going beyond the call of duty and is violating the law. Only then the settlement is arrived at it, only then it can be challenged, otherwise it requires a finality. So I find that so far as the Indian jurisdiction is concerned, the future of mediation is bright, and I look for a separate mediation bar to come up. Of course, there are people from the different fields, and mediation bar should not be confined only to the people from the legal profession. Because as Orit was also saying, and Pushp also supported it, probably what we need is probably the kind of compassion which you are looking for. The kind of not only compassion and the emotional angle which is involved in it. I think that gives you a base for settlement of dispute. Even for commercial disputes, let me point out one thing. I am myself working as a conciliator, of course, conciliator in the earlier terms. Now I will call it a mediator. In all big government company, private, public sector undertaking, in their contract, there is a provision that before going for arbitration, they will refer the matter to an outside expert committee. And that committee is constituted by senior people who are from the field of finance, from the field of law, or a technical people. They sit together and ask the parties to arrive at a settlement. And let me share with you that through this mechanism, in most of the public sector undertaking, almost 50% of the disputes, even before this Mediation Act came into force, are being settled through this outside expert committee mechanism in the public sector undertakings. I think that we have very good examples available in our legal system, which can be copied or looked into by other jurisdictions, whether they suit their requirement. So we are setting very good example, and with passing of this legislation, we have moved in the right direction where we are saying that future of litigation in India is settlement through mediation and not through adjudication process.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Great, sir. Thank you. So, Orit, you wanted to add something on the previous question. We'll definitely allow you a minute because then I need to come back to the other panelists. Please quickly go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, well, as to the question, why mediation, is it a good tool to reduce the burden from court? Yes, it is. But I want to tell you an anecdote. Maybe 15 years ago, the Israeli TV, one of the channels, they approached me to join a panel about mediation as how to reduce the burden from courts. And I said that I don't want to come because I don't think that this is the way to highlight mediation, because there are so many other reasons to mediate. And if we do it properly, and if we educate the market properly, then the court burden will be released. But we should do it from the right reasons and not from just lowering the burden. So I just wanted to put this anecdote in.
Very, very well said. In fact, that was also, connected to my next question, but definitely I'll go ahead and ask that. So what you said was, let that be the derived advantage, right? I mean, you pick up, you embrace mediation for the right reasons, and the courts too will stand to benefit. I think that's the way we should be putting it. So rather than, continue with the same question, now let me tweak, a bit so that I come to Jawad and then Fola. The pull and push of mediation, right? Now that's where we also connect, to some of the previous points which have been raised. Now push through the legislation, pull through advocacy, and maybe an indirect pull and push through training, right? A capacity building. Now, similarly, in the same breath, we'll also have to compare, I think, from slightly more the Indian context, the court ethics versus private mediation. So, Jawad, to you, what exactly is happening between the pull and push? Are we able to strike the right balance, or there is something more to be done? Equally important is they need to be entangled, right? It should not come as a force. It should not come just as another law, but then there has to be an acceptance where people understand and absorb the concept. Over to you.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I'll just take off from where Push and Orit left off, because Push asked a very pertinent question. She thought, why, the question should be, why not mediation? I fully agree with that, because, and Orit also said that, the whole problem is we are looking at mediation as a tool for reducing the burden of the courts. Now, as long as we look at it from that perspective, I think we are going to be having a lot of challenges. And that is exactly what has been happening in India for some time now. So I want to just look at it, because when you talk about the push and pull, I think the first thing that we need is to have a proper understanding of the concept of mediation. And for that, I think we need to understand the mistake that all over the world, everybody has been making all along by looking at dispute resolution as from the perspective of justice delivery, as right and wrong, blaming the person who is supposed to have committed the wrong, and rewarding the person who proves himself or herself to be right. So that is how we have been looking at dispute resolution. Now, when you look at dispute resolution from that perspective, then it requires adjudication. Adjudication requires laws which define the rights and the wrongs. It requires the procedural laws and all the complexities that flow from that. Now, what we basically need is a slight shift in the mindset, the paradigm in which we are looking at dispute resolution. We need to look at it as a problem solving, from a problem solving perspective. So most of the disputes are problems that two people are facing or multiple people are facing against each other, thanks to the different perspectives that they bring to the table, the way they look at the problem. So mediation, basically, the simple concept of mediation is what a mediator does is understand the perspective and shift the perspective. So that is all that is required in mediation, basically. And all those skills that we talk about, the communication skills, the negotiation skills, are all meant to do only this. Understand the perspective. Where are these parties coming from? How are they looking at this dispute? And how do we shift that perspective, help them to understand each other's perspective, recognize the fact that they have a problem that all of them need to work together to solve. So once this shift occurs, I think it will be much easier to sell the idea of mediation. So, and what is happening in India today, if you look at it, because I think I can speak, having, as Push rightly said, that having been involved in mediation for the past 15 years, especially from the Indian perspective, I think I can speak on behalf of the country itself as to how we are looking at mediation. So one of the biggest challenges has been that we have always been looking at mediation as a tool to reduce the burden of the courts, instead of looking at it as a paradigm shift in the way we look at dispute resolution itself. Right? So once we make this shift, I think the going will be much easier. Now, insofar as what Malhotra Saab said about the act itself, the kind of change that the act itself is bringing about, I think that is where I think having a standalone legislation for mediation is going to help us a lot. Because I think one of the things that we need to perhaps make sure that people understand about mediation is that, to borrow Push's question again, why not mediation? I mean, it's one of the most civilized ways of resolving disputes. I mean, when you have a dispute, you sit and talk to each other. Orit gave this beautiful example of her mediating between Jews and Arabs. You have a problem, you sit across the table, you talk to each other, try to understand what the problem is, try to find a solution for the problem. Easier said than done, no doubt about it. And I know how difficult it must be for Orit to handle this particular problem, just as we have our own challenges in India, but of course not as bloody and not as complex as what she's facing, perhaps. But, the basic understanding is that why should we not talk about it and find a solution? So what do we do when we have a dispute? We negotiate. Now, negotiation has its own challenges because, we have our own paradigms and perspectives. We look at the dispute from our own angle. We look at the conflict from our own perspective. We understand this in a different way. We don't try to understand the other person's perspective. We have our cognitive biases. So in order to be able to, facilitate that negotiation, we need a neutral third party who will be able to help us to understand each other's perspective and to recognize what the real problem is, what our underlying interests are, and work towards a solution. So from that point of view, all that has been happening so far in India, because in India it started, as Push pointed out, with the Section 89, enactment of Section 89, and that was the biggest push actually. And but 89 came into existence in 2002, though it was enacted in 1999, but it came into force in 2002. But after that, there was no traction at all until the Supreme Court clarified the provisions of that Section 89 and said that the courts have to mandatorily refer parties to dispute. But even then, mediation remained a sort of a court annexed in the court annexed sphere. It did not move out. It did not move out into what Rohr was pointing out as private mediation. So before we go to the court, we go for mediation. So which is a very commonsensical thing to do, but that was not still coming out. And in India, because we believe in the rule of law, unless something has a statutory basis, we are not able to recognize it as something which is very serious. So mediation continued to be treated as a poorer cousin of arbitration and litigation. It was being looked at only from that perspective of adjudication. And even mediators, even after getting trained, they would go into the mediation simply as adjudicators, and they would behave like adjudicators over there. So this was becoming one of the biggest challenges. So that is where I think the Mediation Act as a standalone legislation would, one, emphasize on the seriousness of mediation and give it the status of something that is, I would not call a poorer cousin or something even equal to litigation or arbitration. I would say it places mediation on a higher pedestal or a higher place than litigation or arbitration. So one of the questions that we normally ask when we do a reality check, when we do the BATNA and VATNA as we call it, basically, which is a reality check with the parties, that all right, you're getting an adjudication in your favor. What next? What happens next? So mediation is one place where you can find that solution, because parties are going to be agreeing to come to a conclusion that works for both of them. And invariably, they're going to be honoring that. So that is one aspect of mediation that gets highlighted in the Act, because the Act itself promotes more of facilitative mediation. And in fact, that is the most important style of mediation that is focused on in the Act. The second thing that the Act does is give a kind of a binding force to a mediated settlement agreement, because it confers on it the status of a decree of the court, which can be enforceable in a court as a sort of under an execution proceeding, rather than having a de novo suit being filed on the agreement which is reached between the parties. So that is one advantage. Though in my opinion, that situation should never come if a mediation is done effectively, because both parties, if they reach an agreement, they're going to be honoring it, because it's their decision, and they would have thought of all the pros and cons with the help of the mediator and come to a conclusion. So that is one very important aspect of mediation. The other things that the Mediation Act does is it provides for the establishment of the Mediation Council of India. My only grouse there with Malhotra Saab is that it's a professional body of mediators, and I think you should have made a provision for mediators to be there as a part of the Mediation Council. But hopefully that, I think, should be sorted out when it is enforced. And coming back to the push and pull, I think one of the important things that Malhotra Saab pointed out was, what the government of India itself is doing. Because the 3rd June 2024 circular that the government has come up with, there's a lot of emphasis that is being laid on mediating disputes between the government and other, organizations or other groups or other individuals, including private contractors. Before that, there was already a circular of 2022, which was a culmination of various other circulars, where interdepartmental disputes also, there was a scope for provided for mediating those disputes. But there was no clear-cut, definition of mediation given over there, as has been done now in the 3rd June letter of the circular of the government. And in this context, what happened was very recently I was in Delhi, and in the Bharat Mandapam there was a gathering of some very important decision makers of the government to whom we gave a presentation on mediation and explained to them how the process works. And a lot of emphasis was laid on how a protocol should be evolved by the government where mediation and arbitration should both be provided for in every government contract, where first mandatorily there should be a referral to mediation, and only if mediation fails, then you go for arbitration. So that would, not only even if the dispute doesn't get settled, at least it'll narrow down the scope of the dispute. It'll give a clearer perspective to the disputants on where they actually stand insofar as the dispute is concerned. So these are the developments that are happening in India, and that one of the most positive things, as Malhotra sir also said, that the government is waking up to this, because almost I think 50% of the pending cases in the court or of the government, where a government is a party. So therefore, this is a very significant step that is being taken. So we are in for very exciting times, and I'm really looking forward to mediation becoming the first port of call rather than an option if, once you go for litigation or you invoke the arbitration and then you try mediation.
True.
No, you try mediation first and then go for the others.
True, true. Thank you. Thank you, Jawad. I mean, as you say, once the fatigue sets in, that is where, somebody remembers, okay, let's talk. And probably, we have done a lot of damage by that time. So very well said. Fola, let me come to you. So it so happens that, I mean, the questions have been answered in a way that, there were answers to my other questions also, right? They're all intertwined somewhere. But let me give another flavor to the existing question. Jawad also mentioned in few cases that there's a lot of comparison between mediation and arbitration, right? I mean, right from a statement made at many jurisdictions, that's a poor cousin of arbitration. And then, of course, arbitration got codified much prior, and now today we are talking about mediation, like, getting into a kind of a book. Now, ad hoc versus institutional mediation, right? Point number one. I mean, let's discuss this versus this comparison to arbitration, the journey of arbitration. Because what has happened is this has to follow its own journey, I guess. This is a debate between non-adversarial and adversarial. This is a debate between something which could have been prescriptive, as arbitration was, and something which requires a lot of flexibility and creativity in terms of thinking out of the box, sitting with the parties, empowering parties to decide on their own. So somewhere by insisting on institutional mediation for now, are we putting the cart before the horse, where the infrastructure has to take some shape over the period? That'll take some time. Otherwise, 98% of arbitration which happens in India, 97% percentage here or there, is all ad hoc. So if that is something which has taken forever to reach a certain level of institutionalization, why should we be even talking about institutional mediation? And is it going to be unfair to the mediators who are getting started, at an individual level or at a smaller level? So your take, and of course, if you have your, any of your comments to the previous questions, happy to hear you from that perspective also. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. I'm super excited to be here, and thank you for bringing me here. So the other panelists have done a fantastic job about the topic, so I wouldn't even go into that. So your questions I have like maybe 4 or 5 questions in one. So I'll try and see how I can just navigate my way. And I'm so mindful of the fact that on this webinar, we don't have only mediators alone. We have other people that are not mediators. So I'm going to first of all go back to the basics and just give a bit of a distinction between what ad hoc mediation is and what institutional mediation is, for the benefit of those that are not mediators. So essentially, when we talk about ad hoc mediation, it just refers to a mediation process that has been specifically set up for a particular purpose. It's not exactly governed by any established institution or a predefined set of rules. And there are certain qualities that make a mediation ad hoc. Number one is the fact that it is customized. The parties have the liberty of choosing who they want their mediator to be. And of course, the selection of the mediator is essentially premised on, am I audible? Oh, okay. I seem frozen. Am I frozen? Okay, yeah. Thank you. Okay then, thank you. Yeah, so the selection of the mediation is of the mediator really has to do with expertise and neutrality. And but what distinguishes an ad hoc mediation is the fact that there is no formal structure, as opposed to an institutional type of mediation that is administered by a recognized mediation institution. Now, I must quickly add that most private mediations for most times fall under private or fall under ad hoc, whereas for institutional mediation has to do with mostly court referred mediations, or where parties approach a dispute resolution organization, and more often than not there are established rules. We have panels of mediators and administrative support. Now, the key differences, even from the definition I've given, is that one is flexible, the other has structure. One has mediation selection, the other, more often than not, you have your own mediators foisted on you. But in looking at the distinction between mediation, arbitration, trying to trace the journey, I think it's first of all important to remind those listening that mediation and arbitration actually fall under what is called ADR. We have litigation standing on one part, then we have arbitration, we have arbitration, mediation, conciliation, negotiation, all coming under the branches of ADR. So sometimes when I see people isolate arbitration, forgetting the fact that arbitration is a branch under ADR. Now, let us first of all even go back into the etymology of the word ADR. ADR essentially refers to any means of settling disputes outside of the courtroom. The reason why we're talking about ADR was because of the difficulties that were coming up in litigation, the time, the level of specialization, amongst so many other things. So ADR came into place to cure some of the inefficiencies of litigation. But what we now see is that ADR seems to have taken up a life of its own. Now, ADR, we now see arbitration and litigation almost in the same bracket. And what we're now beginning to see a scenario whereby we're talking about one being adversarial, non-adversarial, and whatnot. So there seems to be this type of confusion going on, especially when we look at the concept of mediation and arbitration. So in answering your question, Sanjeev, I think the most important thing we need to first of all look at really is the mindset. What is mediation trying to cure? Mediation, essentially, as we all know, is an amicable way of having disputes resolved. Arbitration, as we all know, has to do with taking out the technicalities of the courtroom in place. So, and which we all know that it's essentially a simplified means of trial without the technicalities of litigation. So, whenever we have conversations around arbitration, have conversations around mediation, it's really very, very important we have a clear understanding of what each method of dispute resolution is trying to cure, so that way we don't put everything into the same box. So I know there's really so much to say right now, but I'm hoping that with the way I've been able to set the tone, we can definitely take the conversation from there. Thank you so much, Sanjeev.